Hi, everyone. I see attendees are still coming in, so we'll give it just a minute or two longer and then we'll get started. Okay, it looks like we're mostly here for the moment. So good evening and welcome to today's community meeting about SFO's Ground Based Augmentation System, or GBAS project. I'm Brad Eggleston and I'm the Director of Public Works for Palo Alto. The city's happy to be hosting SFO staff and consultants today who are going to provide a presentation on the GBAS project and answer questions from community members. This is actually the fourth community meeting with SFO on the GBAS project, following previous meetings that were held in 2021 and 2022. So with us this evening from SFO are Nupur Sinha, SFO's Director of Planning and Environmental Affairs, Bert Ganung, the Noise Office Manager, and then three consultants working on the project, Paul Hanna from Lean Corporation, Christian Valdez from Landrum & Brown, and Lauren Olivas from EnviroSuite. And we're going to turn it over to SFO in just a moment, but before we get started, a couple of housekeeping issues. So as you probably got a notice when you logged into the meeting, we are recording this meeting and with the intent to make it available online for people who are not able to make it today. And as I said, there'll be a presentation and then a Q&A session following that. So I'll just say now, when we get to that, we'll be focusing primarily on verbal questions from attendees who want to raise their hand in Zoom. So when we get to the Q&A, if you have a question, please raise your hand. I'll call on you by name, and we'll actually promote you to panelists so that you're able to turn your video on if you like while you're asking a question. We will ask that you limit your turn to just one question, as we want to make sure that there's a chance for everyone. And then last thing to note about that, we may not get to all questions, but there is also the Q&A function in Zoom. And if there's a question that you put in there and that we don't get to, SFO staff is committed to answering those and making sure we provide those. So that's the brief intro. And with that, we're going to turn it over to SFO for their presentation.
Thank you, Brad. So just wanted to introduce our Paul Hanna that you already introduced, and we'll go ahead with our presentation. As you did mention, we will be taking all the questions and providing the answers online on our website at noise.flysfo.com under the GBAS section. And without further ado, Paul.
Thanks, Bert, and thanks everybody for taking some time out of your busy lives with us here tonight to talk about the GBAS project. We've got really four things that we'd like to cover here before we open up to Q&A. So the first thing that we'd like to cover is the status of innovative procedures that have been requested or recommended either by the SFO Roundtable or the City of Palo Alto or the residents of Palo Alto that we've been doing our best to keep track of throughout the project and its duration. So that's what we're going to try to cover first in a little bit of detail. The second thing we'd like to speak about is the current status of our plan for monitoring the noise of aircraft that are flying GLS procedures and looking at which aircraft operators and flight crews are doing a good job, potentially meeting our project goals with those innovative procedures. For those of you that are keeping close track on that, the innovative procedures are the first of the non kind of pure overlay procedures, and those are slated to be published in March of 2024. And as soon as those are published, that will begin the period where the SFO team will be working on, tracking the performance of those procedures and noise monitoring. So just to kind of keep that in mind, we are still, formulating the best paths forward. We're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. The last thing that we want to cover in our prepared materials here is a combined exploration of solutions to the over energy issues with a very particular focus on the airspace above Palo Alto and some of the South Bay cities. And some steps that the airport is taking with the FAA to try to identify the problems and go after solutions. And then we'll have a little bit on next steps, and then we'll open up on our Q&A. So the first thing that I'd like to cover here tonight is the status of the community requested innovative procedures, in particular for the phase that we're in, which is Group 2A. So on this slide, we have the list at the moment of the 6 procedures that are currently being evaluated with members of the public. And I'm not going to go through all of them in huge detail, but I am going to spend a little bit of time talking about numbers 5 and 6, just to kind of refresh everybody's memory about what those 2 in particular look like, as they do have some potential benefits for the residents of Palo Alto. Number 1 and number 2 are the project team's desire to request category 2 approaches. And what that means is, one of the capabilities of a GBAS is to get the same kind of precision approach capabilities as the instrument landing systems that have been on the airport for a long time. ILSs right now, or prior to the GBAS, were the only way to get, category 1, which is 200-foot decision height and a half-mile visibility. And those are the values of how close the aircraft can get to the runway before the pilot has to see the runway environment to then continue the safe landing. So category 1 is you can get down to 200 feet above the runway, and you can get within a half-mile of the runway. If you see it at that point, you continue to land safely. Category 2 is you get to within 100 feet of the runway, and now you're down to about 1,200 feet visible range of the runway environment, and then you can continue to execute the landing. Category 3 means you don't actually see the runway until pretty much the wheels touch the runway itself. The GBAS has been engineered and designed to go after all 3 levels of precision approach capability. But right now, the only level that's approved by the FAA is category 1, which is that 200.5 mile. And one of the things we have to do next in order to keep moving towards one of our project goals, which is reducing delays and getting ILS redundancy, is to make the official request to the FAA to develop the next lowest set of minimums, which are the Cat 2 approaches. And so right now, we are evaluating these with the public as well, because the FAA would like to use the overlay procedures to 2.8 right and 19 left as the basis for the airport's request to go after category 2 minimums. So that would be the overlay approach to 2.8 right that's out there right now on the GLS, and the overlay approach that's out there right now for 19 left. So I'm not going to talk about those in too much more detail, but we can certainly answer questions during today's meeting. There are other procedures. There's one other procedure, which is the 3rd one on the list. That is what we refer to as the side-by approach to 19 left. This would be used in a very, very limited window of opportunity when the airport is in southeast flow and you have visual conditions occurring on the airfield. And at that time, there is an opportunity to reduce delays by basically feeding aircraft in from a slightly different angle to 19 left. This approach path is almost completely, but it is completely over the East Bay. And the airport is currently engaged with the Oakland Noise Forum and other cities in East Bay to review that particular procedure. So we don't have a lot of prepared materials on that one tonight, but it is out there being reviewed. The next 3 were all procedures that were suggested by the SFO roundtable, though to be completely fair, and we're going to talk about this in a bit, While the SFO roundtable did, make a rather formal documented suggestion for numbers 5 and 6, we also recognize that this has been a longstanding request by the residents of Palo Alto to look for opportunities to reduce noise, in particular in the corridor starting at Eddy and crossing over Sinai and Sebin. So we are going to spend just a few minutes talking about 5 and 6 here tonight. And just to be thorough, number 4 is just a modification of the down the bay approach, which is both something that has been requested by the roundtable and is of interest to our flight procedure subcommittee participants, purely for air traffic separation and safety, which could be very interesting. But again, we're here to gather feedback and see which of these procedures make sense, and ultimately request those that the community has the highest interest in seeing pursued for FA development later. So 5 and 6 I'm going to speak about in a little bit more detail, but first of all, again, we got down to 6 procedures, but we got there from a number of suggested, procedures that came both from, the general public and also those from the SFO roundtable. So this table that you see right here on the screen shows a number of different procedures that were suggested by the roundtable. They were then reviewed by our project team and the flight procedure subcommittee participants. The green ones are the procedures that are currently being reviewed with the public because they meet the project goals and they're designable within the time frame that we would make the request to the FAA for their development. So in other words, there's no additional technology that's required. There's not a huge number of flight standards or flight procedure design criteria we have to overcome. So this is a good time to review them with the public, because if we request them at the end of this year, there's a good chance the FAA can continue to develop them. The white procedures that you see on here were good suggestions. Everything that was suggested was a great suggestion, but the white ones, particularly for the GBAS project, have a great fit with our project goals. But the challenge is that there are certain aspects about them that require them to be considered at the next potential innovative procedure design phase, either because there's additional FAA staffing levels at air traffic that will be required to implement them, or there may be some additional technologies that are required. So there are several of them that we're saving to review in those later processes when we look at group 2B or 3 in the coming years. The yellow procedures that you see on here were also suggested, because we made an open invitation for anybody living in the Bay Area or working in the Bay Area to make a suggestion to us. And unfortunately, 2 of them were beyond the GBAS project scope. That was numbers 4 and 5. So we did our best to document them. We reviewed them with our flight procedure subcommittee, but there are FAA, airline, and other industry experts participating on the subcommittee felt that they're beyond what we're currently enabled to do within this GBAS project. We can only look at approach procedures right now. We cannot look at arrivals, and just to be super clear, we can't look at departures either. We're just looking at approaches. So numbers 4 and 5 were considered to be changes to arrivals themselves, and so they unfortunately fell into a different category. But we as a project team and as an airport wanted to do our best and make sure that those ideas made their way to the FAA as well. So our FAA participants were at least aware of them. And in the case of number 5, there was a suggestion by some of our FAA participants that if that was an interesting idea, that perhaps it could be pursued separately from the GBAS project, either through a request to the community engagement officer or as a potential IFP gateway request. And then the last one on there was a suggestion for a revision to the way that simultaneous approach operations occur on 28 left and 28 right. Again, this was the SFO roundtable suggestion, but we want to also acknowledge that residents from Palo Alto have made similar, if not slightly different variations of suggestions, which we do have recorded, and we'll talk about in a little bit. That one at the moment, at least the one the SFO roundtable suggested, there is a significant criteria issue that's being explored right now that's preventing us from exploring that in 2A. And that challenge has to do with aircraft separation and the warning systems, the TCAS system, which is a technology that tells aircraft when they might collide with one another. There's a current challenge right now that's being evaluated by the FAA that needs to be solved first before that idea number 6 could actually go forward. So I just, as I mentioned before, I wanted to take just a moment to talk about two of the Group 2A procedures that are currently available to the public for review that I think are maybe the most interesting to the city of Palo Alto and its residents. The first one that you see, well, what you see on the screen here is a summary of the Overwater 1 concept, or OW1, and OW2 concepts. And what we've done is we've attempted to lay those down. This is a kind of three-dimensional perspective, showing how these procedures line up against the yellow dashed line, which is the existing GLS approach to 2.8 right. That's also very similar, well, it's identical to the ILS approach to 2.8 right, or the LPB approach to 2.8 right. So that yellow dashed line is what aircraft, that would be flying like a normal ILS to 2.8 right would be doing today. The orange dash line is what aircraft that would be flying the RNP Yankee approach, which also exists, would be tracking. And we wanted to put those down to give some perspective that the blue paths that you see are really what's happening for the Overwater 1, which is one option, and the Overwater 2, which is a slightly different option. The goal of these procedures is for aircraft to start the approach at Eddy at a higher altitude with no speed restriction. So today, when you fly all of the published approach procedures that come into Eddy, they're required to start at 6,000 feet, and they're required to be at 240 knots indicated, which can contribute, as we've seen as a project team, to this over energy challenge that is sometimes mitigated through aircraft noise. So the deployment of speed brakes, early flap deployment, gear deployment to slow that aircraft down and help it descend quickly. So our goal here with these innovative procedures is to increase that altitude, drop the speed restriction, and then for anything that's left over, allow that aircraft to decelerate out over the bay, where if it needs to deploy like a deceleration device, it's doing it over the water rather than over a residential area. So it does have a small increase in the total track miles that are necessary to be flown to the airport, but it could potentially have a more significant noise reduction than some of the other Group 1 procedures that we had been examining. So both of these options are out there for the public to take a look at. So we've looked at it this way before. We also prepared this kind of high-level summary of how the three procedures compare. So the Overwater 1 option, which is the blue line there, the Overwater 2 option, which is the yellow line, and then we've made this table to kind of show what's happening both with the altitudes and the speeds. And we may go into this more during the Q&A during our session today, but I just wanted to kind of reinforce that the concept of these innovative procedures is to get the aircraft higher, get them a little bit slower when they start the approach, and then really try to take them out over the water for any remaining deceleration they have to do so that noise is not over certainly Palo Alto, but other South Bay cities to the best of everyone's ability. The challenge with these procedures is that they cannot be used during high traffic periods. So if these were to go forward, and really we're looking for one of the two and not both of them. So when you have an opportunity to think about these procedures, it would be great, if there's one of these that you like better than the other, or maybe if you don't like either of them, that's great feedback too. But if there is one that you like better than the other, that's the kind of feedback we would like to get, because we want to take one of these procedures forward and request it for FA development. But that procedure would only likely be used late at night when there's not a lot of competition between the runways at San Francisco, because this does take quite a bit of separation of aircraft to use. So that's kind of where we are with the current 6 and the SFO roundtable requested procedures. Now I wanted to cover some of the procedures that have been requested by both the city, the airport, and the residents of Palo Alto. And there are probably more procedures than I believe that we've discussed with residents of Palo Alto, throughout the course of the GBAS project. But we wanted to highlight the 6 that you see here on the screen and spend a little bit of time in particular talking about, I know we just talked about, the Overwater 1 and Overwater 2 options, but we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about P3, P4, and P5. But to be thorough, first, I want to point out that we do acknowledge that, Palo Alto and its residents were one of the first groups of people to reach out to the GBAS project to talk about and ask for possible enhancements to the approaches that are used to 2.8 left and 2.8 right, especially during the closely spaced parallel runway operation, which is that 7110.308 reference. That's an FAA order. And one of the requests that came in very early in the project was, is there any way to, either switch the role of 28 left and 28 right, so that 28 left today is the low angle approach runway and 28 right is kind of the normal one. So the question was, well, could you flip flop them and make 28 left slightly higher, which would generate a potential noise benefit for certainly many of the South Bay cities. And then the follow-up question to that was, is there a way to raise all of the glide path angles to a higher value? And the answer is technically yes. But when we reviewed these with the subcommittee, there are a lot of challenges that prevent this from happening, at least for the next couple of years. And so where we are right now is we're keeping track of these requests. But we believe that switching the roles of the runways is probably something we're only going to be able to do in group 3, which is like a 2028 to 2030 timeline type of development. Whereas the possibility of just increasing the glide path angle for 28 left approaches, which you'd also have to do on 28 right at the same time, that could maybe be done just a little bit earlier, but still requires significant FA investment and staffing changes. So it's not a 2A concept that we can explore, it's a 2B, but we are tracking it and revisiting it as the subcommittee looks at new procedures. The third one is just to, again, we just talked about the Overwater 1 and Overwater 2 concepts that we're currently exploring with the public. There are, we want to acknowledge that it was the residents of Palo Alto who were asking for this from the beginning. The current procedures we're reviewing, they're obviously they follow a track that the SFO roundtable had laid out there. But our goal is to make sure that these procedures, do have the intended benefit of potentially reducing the noise of aircraft flying over South Bay cities and Palo Alto. So we're very interested in all of your feedback here tonight and in the future on which of those procedures might be a great candidate to take forward. P3 is a new suggestion that we received by email from the city and the airport here recently, which, excuse me. P3 is an older suggestion. I just correct myself there. P3 is an older suggestion, which we wanted to review in a little bit of detail here tonight, because it has a little bit of a tie-in with some of the discussion of P4. So P3 was a request from, again, the residents of Palo Alto to explore whether there was an opportunity to create an approach that connected from the Pirate Star at ARG that would alleviate some of the, again, potential over energy issues that arise even from aircraft coming in on the Pirate Star, which do sometimes come in later in the evening. And in past conversations, we've talked about this as something that the flight procedure subcommittee was unable to pursue in 2A. That's still the case, but I wanted to take a little bit of time tonight to talk about why it's difficult to do it as a 2A procedure, but why it may be possible to do in a 2B or a 3 procedure, in the not too distant future. And then P4. That's the new one, pardon me, that came in from the city recently, where we're characterizing this as it's right now the subcommittee is viewing it as a change to the arrival procedures for aircraft arriving from the west. That unfortunately puts it beyond the project scope, but again, in the spirit of collaboration, the airport is doing our best to document these requests, and we have discussed these at least in an initial detail with the FAA. During some of our subcommittee opportunities. So that request, and we also had another request from a resident of Palo Alto, which was similar, very similar to the SFO roundtable request for changing arrivals from the southeast. So I'm going to cover those in a little bit more detail right now. So P3, this is again an older request from the residents of Palo Alto, which was to explore whether or not it's possible to make a GLS approach that connects to the Pirate Star as it's currently published. What you see in the graphic on the right, other than a lot of red spaghetti, is our attempt to depict just the aircraft that used the Pirate 2 Star in the month of May 2023. So every red line you see on that screen is a unique flight that filed and was cleared along some portion of the Pirate 2 Star coming into San Francisco. So I haven't made a distinction on time of day here. We do have altitude information for this, but I just wanted to show kind of a starting point about one of the main challenges that we ran into with this request, which is that aircraft that are coming in on the Pirate Star, they do have a fair amount of energy. And the way that the arrival's published right now, they actually have a lot of altitude that they have to bleed off by the time they make it to the end of the published star at ARG. And one of the reasons why you see a lot of spaghetti and not one kind of concise fixed track for these aircraft as they come into ARG, which is the end of the solid black line here, is that air traffic control is using vectors to basically create more distance in some so that they can get separation from other aircraft that are coming into the airport. In other cases, they're using distance to basically help those aircraft descend before they get closer to the airport and try to make that straightest path to come in safely to the runways. So what we see today in the current air traffic environment is that aircraft that are coming in on the Pirate Star are being vectored very heavily. Either they're being changed, they're lateral changes that come off of its published track, or there are vertical changes that are happening. And in a couple meetings ago, we talked about how the current Pirate 2-star, it's very difficult to use as it's currently published. And it's these reasons actually why the FAA is having difficulty using it. They have to, they can sometimes keep the lateral track, but they have to change the vertical aspect of what's happening with the star. So what you see there on this graphic is we see aircraft, some that cross ARG at 8,000 feet, which is what's published for the arrival procedure today. However, we see aircraft that cross at 7,000. We also see aircraft that cross at 6,000 feet. And what we've tried to show here is that if you're an aircraft in the month of May that was using the Pirate Star and you crossed ARG at 6,000 feet, you were likely in that group of aircraft that was making a very kind of short turn directly into line up to land on either 28 left if it's the daytime or 28 right if it's nighttime. If you were crossing at 7,000 feet at ARG, you're kind of in the middle of the spaghetti, and you're definitely going outside, like south and east of side-by, before you connect back into the final approach course. And if you were flying the arrival procedure more closely to the way it's published, crossing at 8,000 feet, you were an airplane that likely needed more distance to safely slow down and descend before you could make that turn directly into the airport. So one of the challenges we see from our flight procedure subcommittee is not only, is this very difficult to replicate and take all of this spaghetti and turn it into one procedure, because if we did, that procedure might not be used that frequently because air traffic needs to create separation. So even if, let's say that we picked the black line and turned it into a GLS approach, we still think we would get this kind of spaghetti in the flight tracks of what the planes do, because air traffic is trying to create separation to bring these aircraft into land while other airplanes are also flying into SFO. The other challenge we have is, let's say that we can solve some of that problem with more investments in technology and staffing at the air traffic control facilities. We would still be in a situation where you might need, 2 or maybe even 3 different GLS approach procedures, which might need to get alternated. This is possible by the GBAS technology, but it is not something that this current air traffic environment is ready to adopt. So we don't want to lose track of this request. We have spent a little bit of time thinking about it. I just want to kind of let folks know that it's not in the 2A procedure set for the reasons that we've just discussed here. So the next one that I want to discuss is the P4 concept, and this is the one that we got via email. And again, so keeping in mind everything we just talked about for the Pirate Star, and the concept that yes, some aircraft are crossing ARG at 6,000, and they're descending, they're turning. Some of them might need to use aerodynamic deceleration to perform that maneuver. The request came in about whether the FAA and the GBAS project team specifically could consider changing the Pirate 2 Star, or coming up with a new arrival path that would route those aircraft, instead of going over South Bay cities, take them up to potentially like Bodega, and then have them connect to D-Bay, and then use one of the upcoming down the bay approach procedures, or use the established vector track of down the bay to basically keep those aircraft as far away from residential areas as possible, especially in late night hours, when no one wants to hear aircraft in general. Again, we took a look at this with our subcommittee, and the immediate feedback we got was, this is, if this change were something to go forward, it is an arrival procedure and not an approach procedure. And more specifically, it will require interaction with the Oakland Center air traffic controllers who at the moment do not participate in our flight procedures subcommittee. So the one answer is, this is a very interesting idea. Unfortunately, it's not something that we can pursue in our current flight procedures subcommittee as a part of the GBAS project team. However, if there was an interest from the city or members of the public, this could be pursued, either through a direct request with the FAA Community Engagement Officer or even through an IFP gateway request, just like some of the other concepts that the SFO roundtable had come up with that we can't pursue ourselves. So I just want to leave that there. I will say one other thing before I move off this one, though, is that there's a small challenge with this procedure in that the path that the aircraft would be taking if they were changed to reflect the dashed lines heading for Bodega at nighttime they would likely only be allowed to occur after the departures, the late night departures, were essentially finished leaving San Francisco into Oakland, because departures from San Francisco into Oakland essentially head up the bay, and then if you're heading to the Pacific or southern destinations, you're going around the peninsula, over the Golden Gate Bridge, and then out into the Pacific this way. So, the best and safest way for this potential concept to work would likely be at times of day when there were very few departures or no departures at the nighttime coming out of Oakland and San Francisco. So just some perspective we picked up on this one. The last one that was suggested by a resident of Palo Alto was, looking at the shared southeast arrival stream. Again, this is the concept where there's an established arrival called the EMZO, which currently is used only for Oakland arrivals. And there was a consideration about whether or not perhaps the GBAS project could consider, using the EMZO RNAV star to support both Oakland and San Francisco arrivals, perhaps late at night, which would just be a different way to keep aircraft, from overflying South Bay cities. As we talked about at the SFO roundtable, this one is beyond our subcommittee's ability to analyze. But if there is an interest in pursuing this, it can go through the FAA Community Engagement Officer or a gateway request. That's the information I had to share on the procedures that have been requested. And I'm going to turn this over to Christian to talk a little bit more about the current status of our noise monitoring and reporting. So, Christian.
Thank you, Paul, and good evening, everyone. So SFO publishes a good amount of information online relative to noise and aircraft performance of noise abatement procedures. They have the flight quiet reporting, Title 21 reporting, portable noise reporting, and ad hoc reports. So there's an abundance of information that we could supply to the public when it comes to noise and aircraft performance. But what we've done in the past is try to keep things consistent with portable noise monitoring and reporting. And a few of things to consider are, if you can look at the graphic on the right, back in December 2021, United flew test flights of GLS procedures, and the airport was able to deploy 6 microphones. And there, if you see the little letters A through F around the Palo Alto, East Palo Alto area, to capture the test flights and the noise events for the test flights. And we're able to compare the United test flights, the GLS approaches versus the non-GLS approaches that occurred during that 2-week period while the microphones were deployed. So moving forward to the Group 1 innovative approach monitoring, we're thinking about 3 of those locations. All of those locations are really great. They captured good noise. There was a little background noise, so that the noise events of the aircraft noise events that these microphones captured were nice and clean, and we're able to examine them and analyze them. But moving forward, we're thinking that 3 sites will be sufficient to capture the noise events, plus the permanent noise monitor in Foster City, that's NMT number 12. We're also looking at how to identify these GLS approaches. They're not, the noise monitoring system doesn't automatically capture them. So we're working with the FAA on trying to get that process automated. Right now, there's a bit of a delay of getting all the times and the aircraft types and the flight numbers for us to go back into the system and see how these GLS approaches performed. So we're still working on that. And once we are able to capture them on a consistent basis, the SFO staff and the consultants will be able to investigate each individual GLS approach to see how it's is performing and if it's performing as expected. The goal is, of course, for the group 1 GLS approaches to be quieter than the existing approaches, and these reports will confirm that. And the format that we were thinking about showing is, again, consistent with the rest of the SFO reporting. And one report that is published on a quarterly basis is the portable noise reports. Can you go to the next slide, please? And the roundtable portable noise monitoring is these 3 pages that are on the left side of the slide. They have about 15 different parts of metrics and values that the roundtable wanted on these reports. Is very concise, and it's essentially a snapshot of the amount of time that these portable microphones are at certain cities around the peninsula. On the right-hand side is the GBAS noise measurement report that we published, and it was that was strictly about the United test flights. Those were the results. So the GBAS noise monitoring reports that we'll publish next year is essentially going to be a hybrid of these 2 reports. Next page. And what they will include is essentially two aspects of the overflights. And one is performance-based comparison, that the noise monitoring system can do that 24/7, 365 without the need of microphones. And with that, we can compare the flight tracks, the geometry of the non-GLS versus the GLS procedures. So they're performing, the tracks are performing, and they're located where they're supposed to be. And we're also able to create gates along the flight path. And along that flight path, we'll be able to know the altitude and speed at various points. But this is, we do want to know how loud they are. So for a certain amount of time, these 3 microphones will be deployed, and the parts of the noise metric parts of the report will include average and individual sound exposure level, SEL, metric, the maximum sound level, the peak noise for each one of these overflights, and we'll compare the GLS overflights versus the non-GLS overflights. Other types of information that's in the portable noise report is aircraft and community noise equivalent level. That's a CNEL. That's an average for the whole day. Also, we'll be able to get the average ambient noise levels at each site, and a new metric that that SFO has inserted into their reports, and that's the number of events above a wide range of noise levels from 55 decibels all the way up to 85 decibels. So you'll see a table of how many events were above those levels. And other things will be the aircraft types, operation types, and also the noise complaints, noise reports around the microphones that were deployed. Something that the residents have asked for is to include all the GLS arrival noise events. So these reports will have an appendix with every single individual GLS arrival. So you can see, you can even do your own analysis if you'd like. And the goal is for the GLS Group 1 procedures to meet the project goals and then be considered for a conversion to an ARNP procedure. Back to you, Paul.
Thanks, Christian. So the last thing that we wanted to cover with our prepared materials before we get to Q&A is to talk about the SFO and FAA exploration of over energy issues. And I was going to turn this last slide over to Bert to take us through. Bert, go ahead.
Thank you, Paul. I'll just be real quick on this one, but we are aware we've received numerous complaints in various direction from the communities over energy issues. As certain changes were made to the procedure over time, it appears that it increased. And so some of the field studies identified descent and deceleration that was occurring, requiring the need of energy depletion devices or speed brakes, possibly flap deployment to ensure that the aircraft stayed on the procedure. And most of these occurred between eddy and eddy and seep in particular. And so we explored some innovative procedure designs and looked at what was going on. Actually had the assistance of United in the simulators and looking at it. So some of this is just the existing procedure design limitations, crew training, and onboard navigation systems, as I mentioned earlier. As of July 23rd, the airport will have sent a letter to the FAA requesting that the solutions be identified and implemented to resolve these over energy issues.
Great, thanks, Bert. So I've got one last slide. It's just a quick kind of reminder of our next steps and what we're working on. So, and I'll just hit this really quickly, and then we can get on to the equally important part of the night with Q&A. So we as a GBAS project team, we are, as Christian mentioned, we are currently working on one of our big challenges, which is our challenge to solve here at the airport, which is trying to accurately identify which aircraft flew a GLS approach. We're trying out solutions while we're just using the overlay approaches right now, so that we can have those slightly more industrialized and giving us the best, most rapid feedback possible by the time that we get to March and the first group of innovative procedures are online and those portable noise monitors are deployed. So we're working on that right now. We are also actively trying to gather feedback from the community on Group 2A procedures. I know there's not a lot of them, but that feedback is very important for us to gather now so we can identify the best procedures to take forward for FAA development. We are, working on the process right now about how we identify Group 1 GLS procedures that we think are meeting our project goals and promote their usage. And we've had presentations in the past on this, but one option, like Christian mentioned, is to, let's say the down the bay approach is working very well by all stakeholders and the residents. And it appears to be, having the intended noise reducing effects. Maybe that's a great candidate for us to look at converting to an A RNP procedure, which means that both GLS and non-GLS aircraft could potentially use it in the near future. There's other options we're looking at, like finding procedures that work very well at nighttime, perhaps, and having those get included by NCT through as a primary approach procedure that would be offered to flight crews moving forward. We're also trying to refine our process about how to very quickly identify when a procedure is not working and suspend its usage. But that's something we're gonna do our best to figure out now, so that when we get to that point and we start getting data back about our performance metrics, that we can implement that and be transparent with the communities about which procedures are meeting or not meeting, and then what we're doing about it as fast as possible. We're also going to be working with the FAA on going after the Category 2 approaches. That is a long-term thing, though. We do not actually expect to have a GLS that's authorized for Cat 2 approaches until at least 2027. So it's still quite a ways away. It's just we're here working with the community to get your feedback, and this is a very good time, I think, to hit that now. The FAA, we are looking forward to their examination of the over energy issues and identifying solutions where possible. So the letter that Bert indicated is a request to the FAA for their own evaluation. And one of the things the airport is going to be doing is sharing all the information that we've compiled, both through the GBAS project and through the history of the Noise Abatement Office, with the FAA to help them understand the same way, we've discovered and many of you have experienced, that there are potentially over energy issues, and then, give them the data that the FAA can use to potentially find those solutions. And then finally, look for our portable noise monitor deployment and data collection starting in March of 24. For Palo Alto, and this is our thought we want to leave with you, we are very interested in getting your feedback on the Group 2A innovative procedures by the end of November, if possible. We have discussed some requested procedures tonight that we aren't going to be able to tackle right away under the GBAS project. We've also discussed some procedures tonight that we just cannot tackle under the GBAS project, but that doesn't mean they're a bad idea. It just means that they need to be pursued with the FAA through an alternative vehicle, either with a community engagement officer or as an IFP gateway request. The last thing we want to point out for folks here participating tonight is that you may have additional thoughts or feedback that you'd like to provide on the noise monitoring reports that Christian outlined. We will take that feedback at any time now, or once the reports are published, if you want to give us that feedback. This is a process of constant refinement, because this is the first time that any airport has attempted to do something of this magnitude. So with that, I wanted to turn things over to Q&A. Thank you again for your attention up till now.
All right, well, thanks, Bert, Paul, and Christian for the presentation. Just noting it's about 6:45. This meeting was originally set up to be a 6 to 7 p.m. meeting, but I know we want to have plenty of time for the Q&A. So just for everyone to note, SFO staff and consultants are available to stay past 7, probably targeting more like 7:30 if that works out for our Q&A session. So let's get underway. I see a couple people have already raised their hands, and the first is Mark Stoll. Mark?
Thanks, and I do appreciate the update and the fact that SFO has taken upon itself to have multiple updates, and I'm really glad that SFO is making a formal request, as it is the only entity that can actually make a request to the FAA for changes to the horrific over energy problems on Surfer. And that really is something that the airport has the ability to do under law and FAA regulation, separate of any GBAS projects. It's when the roundtable wants a new procedure, they request the SFO make the request, and SFO makes the request. And I think this one is really, really critical. And several of us had the chance to go to NorCal TRACON recently, and they're well aware of this problem. I mean, they've described it, I won't say who said it, but one of the more senior person described it as non-compliant at this point, out of compliance. So it's something that I think that if the airport pushes, it can be fixed and it'll make a dramatic difference. I will also note, however, that in addition to Surfer, we're increasingly seeing the use of roll spoilers, which are essentially the same device, on late turns on Pirate and Bodega. So, even as one problem is finally, after years, being, taken seriously, another one is beginning to worsen. So that's the first thing. Also, I do appreciate the briefing, but I would also like to ask that maybe some of the other programs that are underway, such as that are related, such as the changes in approach angles via the .308 programs and such, also, without the jargon, become part of these kinds of briefings, because they will have an impact on us in terms of what the approach angles and altitudes are of planes that fly over us. And I think I had one more point. Oh, the other thing that would be really nice to understand the community, particularly because I'm hearing that it is actually potentially on the table again, is the multiple airport route separation. Now that's only being looked at for Oakland, but if that could be done, and it is an actual program, it could be done for the arrivals over us, and it would make much better use of the bay. So those are some of the things that I know are being worked on, and maybe they're 5-10 years out, but they're the sort of thing that people should be aware of, because there are actual programs that are being considered and pushed by the airlines and potentially by the airport. So if we could expand to some of the related programs and not just GBAS, that would be great. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. And was there any response to the comments from SFO or?
I was just going to offer one quick one on the Mars topic, and Mark, it's always great to have your feedback and appreciate some of the kind words here. So the Mars update, I probably need a whole separate meeting to talk about the role that the Mars concept of operations could play here in the Bay Area. And you're absolutely right. There, both San Francisco International Airport and the Oakland International Airport are basically waiting in the jump seat to do whatever is possible to at first take these GLS procedures that are working very well and make them part of a potential Mars display, like a proof of concept, if you will, that to show that Mars can work in the Bay Area. There are other interests, and this is exactly why we're looking at the process of up-converting successful GLS procedures into ARNP, because multiple airport route separation for everybody else's benefit is an extension of aircraft that are established on RNP, EOR operations. And this is a lot of acronyms, but the idea is that all of the aircraft that are capable of flying GLS approaches, they have precise navigation capabilities, some of which are augmented by the GBAS. That's what gets them very close to the runways. It gets them a nice, precise, smooth track to the runway. But they also have fairly good precision navigation capabilities broader in the terminal area. And air traffic control can take advantage of those very strong navigation capabilities to reduce the required separation between aircraft that are flying into Oakland, flying into San Francisco, going to San Jose, et cetera. So to Mark's point, there is an entire interest and preparedness that both San Francisco and Oakland are working towards to be ready for Mars when the FAA would like to try a proof of concept. There is also some possibility to have the San Jose airport be involved in that as well. But today it's very preliminary, and the FAA has not indicated that it's starting its proof of concept. They just finished their concept of operations document officially. So just to be clear, right now, SFO and Oakland are trying to be there and be first for the proof of concept. There's no FAA commitment to that here in the Bay Area, but we want to be there. And I think when we get closer to that, we can discuss with the rest of the team here at the airport what's the best way to brief residents on what that might look like. So thanks for bringing that up, Mark.
Thanks, Paul. Next question is Darlene Yapley.
Hi, my question is to Christian. Hey, Christian, how you doing? The good news is I heard you say all single GBAS events data is going to be made available. So that's excellent. My question is SFO going to do the comparison for each event, GLS versus non-GLS? Because there's going to be a lot of data versus just the United, test flights that we saw originally.
Right, so we're going to show comparison tables similar to those shown on the United Test Flight Report. Those are the type of tables that we're going to have. So we're going to have the amount of GLS overflights and all the values at each microphone, the altitudes, the speed, all the parameters that we capture, versus all the non-GLS approaches that are similar to the GLS approach path and geometry. We don't want to compare a nice GLS approach with an S turn that's not a GLS approach. That's not comparing apples to apples. So we're first have to look at all the data, but in the end you'll have a table similar to that one published on the United Test Report that shows GLS versus non-GLS parameters.
I don't know why I keep getting reloaded here.
Did that answer your question, Darlene? Oops.
No, I just so I understand, Christian. So there's a chart, GLS, non-GLS, and a third column that says delta per event, correct?
Not per event. We're not going to compare one individual flight with another individual flight, because just the inherent way aircraft fly and the different weather conditions on any particular flight, some of them will be louder and higher and faster than others, and there'll be a high and a low. So we can't compare, say, for example, a really loud non-GLS with a really quiet GLS. That would be an unfair comparison to compare those two individual flights. So they have to be grouped. And I know you don't like averages, but that's the way to compare a big bunch of GLS approaches with a big bunch of non-GLS approaches. And the delta will be at the bottom.
So the pushback is we'd like to see both. I mean, that's exactly what we hired a consultant to do with the United test flights, is that there was the average, which is the, activity that seems to be done by you. But we'd also like to see the comparison side by side. So we're not saying get rid of all of it. We just want to see transparency of both the single flights and the average. And what can we do to push on that? You asked for feedback. We've given this feedback, as you know, multiple times. So what recourse do we have to push this even further?
So right now we're looking at a time frame, right? Reports cover time frames in a calendar year. Right now we're thinking about a quarterly report that looks at 3-month chunks, depending on how much the GLS approaches are being utilized. We want a good sample, so the findings are concrete and supported by the data. And we've said that in an appendix, all the GLS events will be in a big list, similar to the United test flights. You saw all the United test flights.
I understand,
records.
but that's a lot of work for us to do the comparison versus you folks. I mean, those were what, 11 flights that we looked at, I think.
Right. We don't want to, overburden you with.
No,
things
you're
to
not
look at and
overburdening
pages
us.
and
The
pages of
request,
reports.
I feel like my question isn't being answered. My question was, what recourse do we have? We've given input probably for a year now, asking for single event comparisons.
And the only way I could answer that is that the appendix will include all of the GLS approaches. They could be 20, they could be 100 for those, or maybe more for those 3 months.
Yeah, and to clarify, we understand you're gonna have the raw data. We are asking for you to do the comparison and the spirit of transparency and complete information.
So that type of comparison and detailed comparison is being considered by the GBAS team and SFO at this time.
So you're saying it hasn't been approved, but you are aware of this very specific request that we're making?
Correct. Yes.
Is there anything else we can do to escalate the desirability to do this?
Bert?
Sorry, trying to.
It'd be helpful if you told us, otherwise we'll go follow up on our own devices, which is probably not preferable.
Well, as far as the desirability to do it, is, as you mentioned, it's not an easy item to do. We already discussed that it's going to be comparing apples and oranges, especially with different weather, different days. And it's something you just cannot compare 1-to-1. So I don't see the feasibility.
We compared the United flights and it was useful. So I think.
Right, and that was a handful.
Yeah, that's why we don't want to do all the
In
comparisons.
2 ways.
Because it's more than a handful.
No, I'm saying in 2 ways. It was just a handful, but it was a handful. If you follow.
Yes, but remember we all said, gee, we need a lot more data to make any conclusions. So we're not just going to look at the 11 and the motion at the San
Right.
Francisco
And we
Roundtable.
are headed
want
for
to
more
do
data.
averages.
Okay, I think, thanks, Darlene. We'll come
Thank
back to
you.
you again if we have enough
We'll
time.
be
but I
back.
wanna-
We'll be back.
Yeah, but I want to make sure everyone has a chance.
No,
to
thank
get
you,
to their
Brad. I
question.
appreciate the support. Thank you.
Next is Tom Shannon.
Yes, good evening, thanks. I'm Tom Shannon and I live very close to Side-by. And, I'm a new participant on these programs, but sometimes on Saturday and Sunday, it's invariable that anywhere from 7 to 12 flights fly over our yard during the day when you're trying to enjoy the yard. And if you put them on the air posse or stop jet noise, most of them are below 4,000 feet. And, it's just, I hear all this scientific data that you guys collect, but I don't see any relief in sight. I mean, then again, from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m., the flights increase once again going over Side-by. And then the cargo jets come through at 4 a.m. I mean, we have windows open here in the summertime with weather like today, and it wakes you up. And nobody seems to really care or want to do anything about this. I mean, I'm an outside observer sitting there saying, why can't we have 3 side-bys, so to speak, so that it doesn't all hit one particular vector continuously? Thank you.
All right, I don't know if, just to say, like, I think I appreciate the feedback here. It sounded like, Tom, in addition to experiencing some of the challenges there near side-by, you made a suggestion of like 3 separate side-bys. Would your interest be to have the FAA explore like creating more dispersion basically away from the single track? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, I mean, I remember back in the earlier days when we used to intercept the Woodside VOR, and basically Palo Alto was pretty quiet when you used that Woodside VOR. Then suddenly GBAS comes along and Palo Alto just gets clobbered with continuous flights. I mean, and I'm not exaggerating, by 7 to 10 flights a day. And you'll see a question on there. What do you guys do with air posse data? Because you can put all this stuff on stop jet noise and that, but it doesn't seem to have any impact. And the air traffic controller, in my opinion, ought to be able to separate these things so it doesn't come through on the same vector continuously.
Got it. Thanks for the feedback, Tom. Yeah, I mean, air traffic definitely has their hands full with at the peak periods for separation. But I wanted to, Bert, is there anything else you wanted to add relative to Tom's comments? Okay.
Well, let me just finish by saying too, we get San Carlos traffic, and that's flying at a very low altitude, and that flies right over all of Palo Alto's neighborhoods. And then you have Palo Alto Airport coming through, and then you have Stanford, the medical center, flying in the helicopters. Now, as again, I'm not a scientist in trying to solve all this, but you can imagine the noise impact this has on daily life.
Thank you, Tom, for those comments and question. Next is Marie Jo Fremont.
Thank you. So before I ask my question, I want to follow up on what Darlene was trying to convey. I wrote, and SFO, I wrote you a long email on that single event comparison. I even explained how you would do it. I do not buy the fact that you have to do so many comparisons, because to do apples to apples, you have to compare the same aircraft, the same airline, the same procedure in a very narrow window of time. So don't tell me you cannot do that. I mean, you can. So I hope you will. And by the way, Darlene didn't mention also that we want the actual noise compared to the model noise, because for over 2 years, we have asked, what's your accuracy on your model and what's your precision on your model? And we have never got an answer for 2 years. So I add that to that. So now let me go to my questions. To my question, you showed some proposal today that the city or other residents submitted, but I also submitted on May 31st. I submitted some GBAS IA for DBA 28 left, DB1 28 left, bridge BV, bridge visual, etc. I didn't see them on your list. So what happened between May 31st and today? They went to the SFO GBAS email.
I'm going to interject. I don't know that I've seen those just yet. Just speaking for myself in terms of our preparation for the meeting. So my humble apologies, Marie Jo, that we don't have those available to share today. I will work with Bert and the team to try to track them down to make sure that they're there and that we can cover them in a future meeting.
So this is, as long as, so thank you for doing this, but this is a big issue. You want for us to submit stuff to the SFO GBAS email, it's a black hole. You don't get an acknowledgement that you submitted something. And here it is. I have submitted emails on April 14th, on May 31st. I have zero answer, zero communication on technical questions that I've dealt with technical topics my whole life. You don't deal with technical topics via email and via a Q&A answer, a spreadsheet that has, I don't know how many pages. That does not work. So do something, please.
Well, I can say that the spreadsheet questions that we are answering these on were suggested by the public of Palo Alto. We adopted that, and we are using that as the format to respond to all the questions that come in through SFO.GBAS, through sessions such as this one and other public forums. And so we feel it's the most fair way to do it, and also keeps people receiving the answers that we're able to generate and give them.
I agree, the spreadsheet is necessary, but to get to a spreadsheet, to capture an answer, you have to understand the question, number one. The reason also we ask for a spreadsheet is because we don't have a seat at the SFO roundtable, so we can't ask any questions. We cannot dialogue with you. The only dialogue we have with you in person, verbally, is when the city of Palo Alto hosts a community meeting. We never get to, we can ask questions in public comments at the SFO roundtable. We're limited by 2 minutes and we don't have a back and forth. So the reason why there is a spreadsheet is because, number one, we don't have any other option. Number two, we could not remember the answers. So documenting the answers, it's a meeting note. In technical meetings, that's what you do. You put your meeting notes. But the thing is, the dialogue, like this whole single event thing, I spent half an hour with Christian in May in person to discuss with him and explain to him what we were looking for. Then I sent this long email. It took me 3 hours to try to compose an email. And then what happens to it? No idea.
We're in the process of responding.
Thanks, Marie-Jo. Next is Rebecca
Brad,
Ward.
Brad,
Oh, Christian, sure.
Yeah, if I may add or answer Ms. Fremont's question about the error or the variance of analytical models or the ADT, for example. So there's this guide book or guide by the published by SAE, the Society of Automotive Engineers. It's titled "Monitoring Aircraft Noise and Operations in the Vicinity of Airports." It's kind of like the Bible of how to measure and monitor aircraft noise. And in there, there's a sentence that talks about the variance of the model, the error in the model itself. And I'm going to read it to you. Analytical models often have a 95% confidence interval of plus or minus 3 to plus or minus 5 dB. Therefore, a difference of 3 dB between an estimate or measurement and one from an analytical model may not be significant. And also there's an inherent uncertainty of modeling, measurement equipment, the microphones. It, depending on the signal noise, depending on how clear the noise event is relative to the ambient noise, the other noise around the microphone, it could be a swing, a plus or minus 1 dB difference. So it could be a 3 dB swing.
Okay, Rebecca?
Hi, yeah, thanks everybody for actually holding this meeting. I think I'm going to try to follow on to Tom's comment, but elaborate and then ask my question. So in 2014, for the entire year, there were 580 noise complaints into SFO. And then the year after, next gen, 2016, there were 680,745. And Palo Alto has, since that time, been the top noise reporter into SFO, and nothing you're really talking about is going to alleviate the concentration. And hopefully all of you read the article in the New York Times about how noise can take years off your life. And they explicitly talked about hundreds of flights over a day, which, by the way, that is what you get if you live between Eddy and Side-by. Because you have the 3 roads converging. And so, Paul, it'd be great to talk about how can you disperse this stuff? Because what you're showing, even for the 2As, is still going over Eddy and Side-by, maybe at a slightly higher altitude. But I think the noise annoyance study shows that, the number of overflights matters. And obviously, we have a number of them, including lining up both 28 left and right over Palo Alto. That's not an uncommon scenario. And often when that happens, one of the flights goes below the 4,000 Class B limit while it's trying to line up with the other one. And so that creates a safety issue because it's going below Class B. And then, and I know this is a long question, but it is the dispersion, but it's also the concern about, you know, trying to line these planes up so closely. So I looked at the, what is it, the ARS database, the one that's put out where you can actually see where pilots report stuff. And they actually did, and maybe this is what you were alluding to, Paul, there's a number of issues with TCAS alerts and recommended actions. And some of the pilots say, you know, the procedures of perfectly pairing are not safe. I mean, that's literally in the database. And so it seems to me that there's both a health issue from the perspective of the concentration that I just don't see your next innovative ones that you want our, you know, opinion on doing anything to disperse the traffic or deal with the excessive noise. It's great that finally, you know, 5 years later or 6 or 7 years later, we're trying to get the FAA to do something on Surfer, but that should have been addressed years ago. And Pirate, as Mark mentioned, has a similar issue. So I guess I'm hoping you can comment on what you can do that's more innovative to actually disperse this traffic, because it's just clearly unhealthy.
So I might endeavor to share my screen again, just to speak to something quickly to answer your question. So I'm going to share my screen. And it's not new material. I just wanted to kind of go back to this particular slide and talk about the issue a little bit. So and I'll talk about it with the overall too. I'll go full screen here. Here we go. So I think, you know, there's a lot of dispersion that is happening that air traffic is utilizing for safety and separation purposes today. It's not every flight, obviously. Some aircraft are going exactly down, you know, the RNAV arrival, and they're connecting right to the RNAV approach. Now, this example I've got up on my screen, there is no approach procedure today. And when, you know, when the subcommittee looks at concepts like this one as an example, you know, and we see that there could be an opportunity to procedurally create dispersion and maybe go after optimized, you know, profiles at the same time. So not only would you be able to potentially disperse tracks, but you'd also be able to make sure that an aircraft going on any one of, let's imagine for a second, the 3 tracks that you see here on the screen, that they could do so in a very energy efficient way where they're not, you know, deploying spoilers or speed brakes or anything of that nature. The challenge we have for concepts like this is these can be explored, but they're in future phases, because in order for our air traffic counterparts at the FAA to utilize this kind of advanced level thinking, there's a possibility this comes from like the Mars concept that we're just hinting at a little bit here today. But there are really other technologies that are still just being worked on by the FAA to enable that kind of sophistication with their air traffic controllers and with the aircraft. So, you know, we may be talking about things like this one as a possible GBAS, you know, innovative approach procedure, but really what we're waiting for the FAA to be able to make those additional investments to use them in an efficient way. And so the one other thing I'll point to is, you know, to actually go after, you know, the concept of trying to keep aircraft away from eddy and side-by specifically. I think, you know, the city and residents of Palo Alto have made some great suggestions that could be explored by the FAA. Unfortunately, they're just beyond the GBAS project scope that we have, you know, that we've been permitted to do with the FAA. So like P4 and P5. So P4, an example, like this concept here, this could, you know, for certain hours of the night, you know, when there weren't departures maybe coming out at that time, this is a great example of one possibility where, you know, significant dispersion in the tracks could be created. My challenge, just as a member of the GBAS project team, is, you know, we can't pursue this from the GBAS, but that doesn't mean that it can't be pursued or it can't be explored. It just has to be done through a different you know, vehicle. The same thing is true for this particular concept. This would be, you know, arrivals for aircraft coming from the southeast, you know, and the request could be to have the FAA examine, you know, using a totally different arrival procedure. So you know, I'm excited that these ideas are surfacing through the GBAS project. You know, we can't continue them through the GBAS project, but that doesn't mean that stops there. It just means that, you know, an alternate vehicle needs to be used to explore them. Bert, did you have something else that you wanted to add in on this?
No, I think you definitely summed it up very well, Paul.
Okay.
Well, actually, no, I think it does go to you, Bert, because if Paul's saying, well, it can't be, done through GBAS, but great ideas, then the airport, I think, as Mark Schull mentioned, is the vehicle to the FAA. And as you know, we don't have a seat at the SFO roundtable. So, and it took you like 7 years to get Surfer in front of the FAA. How would we get these things that actually disperse traffic? Because you clearly, this concentration is unhealthy, like it's documented unhealthy. And the airport, benefits significantly from the operations. We do not in Palo Alto, we bear the health risks. So how do you take it forward, Bert?
Well, we definitely have already. I don't know if you heard earlier in the meeting, but we've submitted to the FAA and are submitting to the FAA requests for them to examine items like over energy and the possibility of certain procedures. The FAA is definitely very staunch on what they can and cannot do. We have approached them many times about dispersion, and image that Paul showed a moment ago about the tracks being widely dispersed. The FAA looks at that and says they are dispersed. If they happen to be on the rail, then less of that red will be there. It will be a much narrower band of traffic. And so the people under that will not do as well.
Right, that is true of Surfer, which is often straight in, but it's also the case that chart that Paul, you put up is misleading, and it looks like a very big area. Most of that red, if not all of that red, is over Palo Alto, and the area is not that far apart. So I think, yeah, so when you look at that, you see Side-by, which sits in Crescent Park, and then you see the red slightly to the right of that. Well, sure, that's still going to hit. Oh, and I live in Old Palo Alto, which is between that. All of that hits me. And then it goes into Midtown. So that's not this large dispersed area. It's still a very relatively narrow corridor. Whereas if you look at the yellow line, which is what it used to do, that went out over Menlo Park. And that does avoid us, right? So that would be a more equitable thing. But when you look at the rest of this, it basically goes over Palo Alto. That bright red is us. So it's not dispersed from a living perspective.
Okay, well, thank you, Rebecca, and for the answers from SFO. We're going to move on to Jennifer. Who's next? Jennifer? Jennifer, you should be able to unmute.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, it's 4 a.m. in Vienna, Austria, so pardon if I'm a little bit sleepy, but a lot of good questions came up, and thank you for having this report. Bert, I'm gonna have to disagree with you that the process is fair relating to the questions. I equate the project that you referred to, it's like any other project that happens. If this were a pipeline, it's like asking Exxon to run the project and engage with the community. And that's what SFO is. They're the industry player. The responsible agency is completely missing. So every time you say, we've asked the FAA, we've asked the FAA, this project has too many pieces to qualify as a piecemeal thing. If I heard anything today, it's we're suffering from not just one airport, it's multiple airports. It's several problems, several technologies, and one agency is responsible for all of that. And that agency isn't at this meeting. So I've requested the reports of all of the procedures that have been requested for, I might add that this project started, 5 or 6 years ago. It took 3 years to answer 6 questions that citizens sent in by email. And instead of answering the 6 questions, 300 more were added, and they're all part of this tiny little spreadsheet. So The process hasn't been great to begin with. I know there's a great deal of effort, and I'm sure Exxon would also make a lot of effort to make sure that the pipeline would work out well when they're trying to work with the community. But it's a little bit of a bait and switch that happened here. And now with more technologies happening, you know, I look at this sort of like a checking account or say a financial statement. We're looking at a lot of details, this deposit, that, you know, that transaction, but we're not looking at the cumulative effects, which by the way is law to look at the cumulative effects. And so there's a lot of things that we need to work on as an overall relationship with the airport and the FAA, of course. We're in the middle of trying to change these policies. And so I just think that, and one last comment is all the acronyms. I mean, I've been around for 10 years and I understand quite a few of them, but I cannot imagine this is not a way to communicate with the public. This is an update for a technical group. And lastly, what Rebecca Ward raised. I mean, the reason that the project needs to be run better is because how else do we prioritize the dollars that are being spent? Our tax dollars are going to working all of these procedures in order to benefit SFO. And so how are our priorities getting in there, given all the impacts that are being caused by multiple airports and by an agency that is absent? So we've sent a lot of, you know, comments in writing regarding this, but I think that, you know, this piecemeal approach and then declaring that nothing has an impact and then not giving any information about cumulative impacts is a real problem. So I'm just going to have to disagree that it's fair. This is not fair. And the city of Palo Alto should also be doing more to address this issue. And I appreciate everybody's effort, but, you know, the only way we're going to be able to really help anyone is by actually getting to something that appears to be fair. And just right now, I'm not feeling that yet. Thanks.
Thanks, Jennifer. Let's see, we said we could go to about 7:30. We've got 3 more hands raised for questions from Darlene Yapley, Mark Scholl, and Marie Jo. So hopefully we can get to all 3 of those relatively quickly, and then we'll wrap up after that. So Darlene?
On a positive note, maybe SFO could do a confirmation when we send an email, because, you know, that would be useful just so that we have sending and receiving. My question is, a SFO team member, one of you panelists, at one of the SFO roundtable meetings, there was a discussion about innovative approaches should not be pursued if it has too many track miles or it's turning away from the airport. And could you speak a little bit more? Because you did also mention that there are some innovative approaches that are, you know, going a little bit further. So, you know, Paul, could you elaborate when it's where the boundaries are?
I will attempt to use this graphic, and let me see if I can. I was going to see if I could mark my screen, but you know, I don't want to delay the opportunity for others to ask questions. So
Yeah, you don't need to show the graphic.
Okay. Well, hopefully, if you can see can you see my mouse cursor that's moving on the screen by chance?
I can.
Awesome. So there were a couple of different examples of overwater procedures that were explored with the Flight Procedures Subcommittee. The blue line and the yellow line are the ones that you know, had that passed current design criteria, that looked like we could you know, optimize the descent profile and manage the energy of the aircraft in such a way that it should be repeatable and it should be, you know, as efficient as possible. We did look at some other examples where, for instance, you know, the original roundtable request for the yellow line was to actually follow the bridge a bit more closely. So instead of this particular track that's heading, you know, kind of across the bay, it actually makes more of a right-hand turn and comes across the bridge and then lines back up and heads towards the runway. Somewhere between that heading and the yellow line that you ultimately see on the screen, that was the point where we started to get a lot of pushback from some of our Flight Procedure Subcommittee participants on that question about track mile and angle. And so what's happening is if you actually parallel the bridge, you are turning the aircraft more than 90 degrees of heading change away from the airport on this particular approach procedure. Just to be super transparent, that is a similar challenge that has to be overcome here. It doesn't mean it can't be done in design. It's got a little bit more to do with the philosophy of designing procedures and what the airlines are willing to tolerate. Airlines are willing to tolerate this kind of vectoring that they're getting from air traffic because they respect that they're being separated for safety reasons, as an example, or they're still needing to bleed off energy. But when we design procedures that are meant to be used every day, kind of without fail, that's where we start to get those efficiency considerations. So just to give some examples, you know, the procedures you see on here, the blue line was maybe only a few nautical miles longer than like the RNP Yankee, which exists today. The yellow, I'm going from memory here, so I might not get this exactly right. I think it's
Paul,
like,
I think the question, Paul, is how can we give some weighting to the suffering of the other parties? Because we don't have a seat at the table when this discussion takes place. So who makes the decision that, oh, the airlines are going to suffer too much? Do you see what I'm saying? What's the decision-making process?
oh, I do. And the challenge, you know, so I'm a facilitator of a subcommittee. So our goal is to try to build consensus among all of our participants. So we have the airlines.
Right, but we're a stakeholder and there's no consensus with us.
Well, I understand the point you're raising here. You know, again, the goal of the subcommittee is to, you know, look at the technical feasibility of procedures and look at, you know, the likelihood of those procedures to be used by the airlines and air traffic, and then stop there, right? Because, you know, we want to bring these procedures back to the community and get your feedback. And let's say that you, like, if I'm not putting you on the spot, but if residents,
I think my question is, who is the decision maker? To your point, you have the technical validation, and then who's the decision maker?
So, you know, technical validation, you know, gives us the opportunity to put it in front of the public. We get the public feedback. And then there is a decision that's made by the airport ultimately on how to balance the public feedback versus the technical feasibility. But the technical feasibility has to be a box check first before we are permitted to even put it in front of the public. So once the subcommittee has essentially come to a consensus that this could be used, that it could be designed, then we gather the feedback. The airport collects all that feedback and then, you know, makes the determination about whether that seems to be.
I think that's related to a little pushback. There's a lot of ideas here where we're supposed to go to the community engagement manager or the IP gateway. And we've been very clearly told that we need the airport to do it. Those other avenues are just like put it in the circular file cabinet. So I think when you say that, just be aware that we've gotten knowledgeable people that have told us it's not a viable process.
Oh, you mean like what we're talking about for P4 and P5?
Submit all the ideas, the community engagement manager put on the IP gateway. If you want to walk us through and show, because we've been told no, nada action. We need the airport to support us, just like they're doing with the noise at Surfer.
Understood. Yeah, I know, and I'll defer to Bert and others if they want to pick up on that one. But I understand what you're saying.
Be careful about putting that on the slide because it's kind of doesn't have the right brand that you want.
Okay. Bert, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Oh, I do. I just had to get off mute. Sorry about that. So basically, we're being told that the FAA will take through the community engagement officer. And so the input that is given can go through them. And if it is deemed feasible or usable, they will then put it on the gateway. Same way they do for us.
No, but we were told that we need the airport to be supportive to advocate this for us. Whatever it is, whether it's the over energy at Surfer or anything, you know.
Well, you're getting that. I can tell you right now, you're getting that.
No, that's
And
my
then
point.
some.
We're getting it through the airport, not through the CEO and the IFP gateway direct posting. I just want to clarify the process.
I'm parroting what we are told that we can tell you. To do.
Okay, that's what you're told. Okay, I think that's your saving. Put quotes marks on that. Got it. That's
Thanks, Darlene. I want to see if we can quickly get to Mark and Marie Jo's questions as the final ones for the meeting. Mark?
Hi, thanks a lot. Going back to concentration, you know, NextGen's is built around an architecture of concentration, and the FAA's view, which they, or, you know, you see all the time, Airlines for America saying, fewer people have more people have less noise. But the reality is but they're doing that by concentrating it on a few. And as a result, they're exploding the number of people who are, you know, basically have incredible amounts of noise and intolerable amounts of noise, and are, you know, so it's really this weird thing that makes no sense. And in the long run, probably it's unhealthy and probably is not sustainable. Having said that, you know, it's a huge, huge issue because, you know, that's the architecture they created. But it has also been added to by actions by the airport and roundtable. I mean, when you look at the concentration over Palo Alto, the request to move the pirate track from a turn of 040 to 060 was specifically done by the roundtable, supported by the airport. And that added more concentration directly over Palo Alto. That was simply moving noise. And so, you know, it's not simply, oh, we have to look at long-term, you know, technical solutions to get dispersion. We have to think about the fact that a lot of one part of the concentration was actually an initiative put together by the roundtable and also supported by the airport. And, you know, there's slides from the FAA when they presented it saying, this is what you wanted. The region wanted this. And Palo Alto suffered because, of course, it had no say. That's number one. Number two, you know, data really does matter. We have hundreds of 200 or so plus flights over us a day. And yet one of the reasons we don't have a permanent monitor is if you look at SFO's Part 150 filings, which define the areas of impact, we're not included because historically and to date, SFO defined this area of impact as being San Mateo County. And in the most recent, several years ago, when you did your last update to the Part 150 filing, Palo Alto did object, and it objected on the grounds that the airport has not updated where it's flying, where the tracks are concentrated for 20 years or so. And so it tells the FAA where they should be able to, you know, who's impacted, so that when we now request a monitor, we're saying, well, we're outside impact. We're not qualified by FAA regulations. And those are the things that are in airport control. Palo Alto should be defined in SFO's Part 150 filings as being heavily impacted. That has nothing to do with anything you can't do. It's something you just haven't done. And it's really important to basically move, you know, take what actions you can, because that's the reality. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Let's see. Hopefully we can get a quick question from Marie Jo. And then we'll have one last comment or question from Mayor Lydia Koo after that.
I'll keep it short. Thank you, Christian, for specifying the accuracy on the model. I completely agree with you. That's what I've read, but I needed SFO to say because you are the authority on that. So given that you have a plus or minus 3 to 5 dB possible error, and I'm talking on the peak noise, how do you, as a team, a GBAS team, make recommendations on GBAS IA approaches that show less than 3 dB in cell changes? How can you technically justify that recommendation and say it is quieter? I would like the technical justification, because I am at a loss there. It is misleading the public. It's misleading the roundtable members when you have an error on your model, which is of the order of magnitude is 3 to 5 dB on every level. So how do you justify that?
The noise calculations have been around for, 100 years or more, but noise models they've gotten better and better over the years. The FAA used to have this model called Integrated Noise Model, INM. Then that became updated with the Aviation Environmental Design Tool. It's a top of the line model. It's the required model that the FAA says all noise assessments in the U.S. Should use that model. Is used internationally. So the model itself is as best of an estimator of noise and noise impacts as you can get. In the year 2023, noise calculations still have an error. It's just an inherent part of noise modeling. Noise models are one tool. We have microphones, noise measurement equipment that is also a tool for this exercise. That in itself has errors, has a fluctuation. It's called uncertainty of measurements. It's not precise. And the best we can estimate is that a noise level will be within a window when we measure and then when we model. And we're using the best top of the line, systems and tools on this exercise. And that's the best we have.
I understand all of this, Christian, but you guys have made recommendations to go to pursue some IAs or not pursue some IAs because you have clearly stated it will reduce noise or it will not reduce noise. And this is absolutely untenable in front of any technical person based on the errors. And now you understand why we're so interested in the noise measurements, because you have a large margin of error on your model, which I'm not blaming you for that. That's the reality, let's face it. But you need to do that single event comparison as the consultant did for Palo Alto, because that's really where the rubber meets the road. I understand there is error in the measurement as well, but the reality is you cannot make some decision and make recommendations in front of a body of people who are, most of them are not technically savvy, and no blame to them, and claim that this is a noise reduction when it will not be a noise reduction. The only people who will declare that's a noise reduction is the people on the ground. They will know if they can hear it or not. And you have heard me tell you so many times, nobody hears a cell number. It does not exist. Cell is like DNL. It's a calculating metric. And if you don't like DNL, now people have finally figured out that DNL is not that good. So you should not like cell either. And you need LMAX, and you need to be much more cautious in when you present your results and say what it is. The model shows this. And by the way, our error is plus or minus 3 to 5 dBs. And then let the people make a decision based on that. And then beef up your noise report monitoring, which we will provide direct feedback now that it seems that you have a template that we can look at.
Thank you for those comments, Mary Jo. So LMAX will be part of the report, has been part of the reports that the airport publishes. So LMAX is included, and it'll, just like speed and altitude and SEL will be included for every single GLS overflight. That will be in the appendix. So that will be at your disposal.
And you need the non-GLS comparison. Otherwise, this thing, you will never be able to say that it is louder or quieter. Otherwise, you're just waving your hands and it's just hype. Sorry to make it so blunt, but that's what it is. Thank you.
Okay, our last question is from Mayor Lydia Koo. Mayor Koo?
Hello. So first I want to say thank you to all of you for being here today and for the presentation. So thank you so much. And Brad, welcome home. So I just want to also ask that when you go to the San Francisco Roundtable, that you do take our comments and our concerns here from Palo Alto and remember them when you're giving feedback or giving recommendations from the San Francisco Roundtable. Secondly, Paul, you had brought up the slide number 7, and I was just kind of wondering if I might be able to take another look at it. Right. So over here, it shows the altitudes from one point to another point, right? And you can see that it's all over residences or people. And so I can see here from Eddy to Sidby, you know, it's around 6,000 to 7,000, depending on what it flies. but then from sit-by to wherever it's next, I think Seapin or wherever it is, it goes lower. So there is East Palo Alto that is affected greatly also. Then, of course, there's also the concern of pirate that comes to ARG, which was supposed to be at 8,000, but somehow, from ARG onto its next location, then it, ARG to sit-by or wherever it goes, that is, there's no determination. I mean, you can see the lowest is at 6,000, and I know you talked about air, the speed and so forth, but is there any way to keep it any higher? And I know that, they have to make a much sharper. Can it go at the black dotted line always?
Yeah, great question, Mariku. So to answer your questions in reverse order, perhaps. So for this procedure, if in the future we were to explore, like let's say for Group 2B, that this is the first procedure that we explore with the subcommittee and with members of the public, the black dash line is the only one that would work repeatedly for starting your approach at 8,000 feet at ARG. And the challenge is that if the aircraft really winds up at this waypoint in space at 8,000 feet, they need extra distance to safely descend and slow down to then make the approach. So if you're crossing ARG at 8,000, you can't take the green track. That's too steep, too sharp a turn. You'd be very hard pressed to make the blue track, but you could make the black dash line. So in the future, like as a part of Group 2B, that is one of the first things that we would likely explore is this black dash line and turning that into an approach procedure. But to go back to this question about, perhaps if we're flying this direction, how high can we get over Eddy? The answer right now is around 7,000 feet. That is about as high as we can get. Again, looking at that, the ability of the aircraft to slow down and descend without deploying speed brakes or some kind of energy dissipating device over Palo Alto or East Palo Alto, right? So the idea is if we do this at 7,000, we slow the aircraft down and we take them out over the water, then the physics of flight work out, potentially very favorably. To get higher altitudes over Eddy, it takes new tracks that have not existed before in terms of published procedures. And this gets us into a situation that we as an airport have committed to avoid at all costs, which is, introducing innovative procedures where, like, let's say, to the east here or even further to the east, there are no approach procedures there today. And so we take that as a hard line as a team that we will not put those forward. Now, if members of the public were to put those forward, we could analyze them in more detail, but we as a subcommittee and as an airport will not suggest those procedures because that would be, potentially considered a noise shift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that I understand. Do you also look at land use? If there's more industrial over there versus residence?
That's a great question. So far, we have not engaged tremendously in looking at the land use for procedures, and we rely quite heavily on public feedback for procedures like this. So for instance, when the roundtable was making their suggestions for the blue and the yellow tracks, there was some guidance given to us about trying to keep, for instance, the yellow track over what appears to be more industrial areas, and we really appreciate the feedback that came from the roundtable in that instruction. But if there are other areas or concepts that would better be used for industrial areas, we would really appreciate that information from folks like yourself or other residents that would provide that to us.
Oh, so my concern about from Eddy to sit-by, it's descending. The plane is descending as it's approaching sit-by, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
But it won't go under the 6,000, or could it potentially be under 6,000 by the time it reaches sit-by?
So the two innovative concepts that we're asking, residents of the Bay Area to review right now, the procedure we have is the GLS OW1 and OW2. So we're the one that's being designed is 7,000 feet at Eddy, and then 5,400 feet at side-by. That would be the published minimum altitude. It is possible that some aircraft could choose to cross side-by at an altitude that is higher than this, But if we went forward, let's say that we went forward with GLS OW2, aircraft by procedure, if they were just on the procedure as it was cleared, they would not be below 5,500 feet at side-by. That would be the design of the approach.
They would not be, right?
Correct. If
Okay.
they did go below 5,500, it's either because something was going wrong with on the flight deck, like there was an emergency that was being managed, or air traffic control took them off of the procedure and was vectoring them. We don't have any control over that. So we can't tell, for instance, we can make procedures, but if air traffic needs to vector them for safety purposes, to create separation or to prevent like a collision or something like that, that's their purview, and we can't do anything about that. But we can design procedures that we hope maximize safety so that they don't need to take the aircraft off, if at all possible.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. And I repeat to please keep us in mind as you're discussing points with the San Francisco Roundtable. Thank you.
Great
Thanks
questions.
for being here again.
Thank you, Mayor Koo. So I think we're ready to wrap up. Very good discussion today. Thanks to all the community members for attending, and to SFO for being here for the presentation and the very good discussion. And with that, we will end. Thank you.